My name is Peter. He, him. Now, that's something that we're not used to doing in terms of introducing ourselves, but we're really focusing on that a lot this year because we're trying to make our community more open and welcoming to people who are not traditional gender-wise. And so what we're talking about today, and we're going to have this video, it's a really quite wonderful TEDx presentation. It's only 15 minutes long, so that will be over quickly, and then we can have a little discussion. But after the sermon today and everything else about imagination, can you imagine that people who have been just ground out and discriminated against in such an awful way would actually feel like they were welcome and loved and able to be part of everything with everybody? And I feel this very personally because in my family, there are a number of people who do not fit in to the traditional gender issues. So, onward.
That highlights some of the things that were on slides. If you would like to pass that around so you can remind yourself of some of the things that you saw or heard. As we start our conversation today, I wanted to first ask, in watching this video, was there anything that you were familiar with already? What did you know? What did you resonate with? What did you connect with that you were aware of? I invite you to raise your hand and we'll pass the mic around. Was there anything familiar, anything that made you go, oh yeah, I know that, and you have a feeling about that?
So I have a godchild who's 11, Lolo, and Lolo was born in, well, we all thought like a female identifying body, and Lola's now choosing to be they, them, and she talks about being NB, so it's like, she'll write me like ENBY, NB, but it's like slang for non-binary. And so I really love these different umbrellas because it gives me even more language when I'm chatting with Lolo about how they're identifying. So I think that all of these umbrellas give us so many more tools.
Thank you. Others?
I'm not sure I need the mic, being noisy by nature. One of the things that came across to me, and this is like the third time I've watched this, was that it's not just a woman who chooses to use pronouns they, them. And it stops there. It's like, this isn't just about a pronoun, but that they're saying more about themselves. I'm non-binary, so whatever expectations, presuppositions you may have about me being a woman who's choosing to use these pronouns, that's not deep enough. There's more to it. And then the opening line she said, where it's we need to listen to hear who they really are. It's kind of like I think you can think of pronouns as being the end, like we're using pronouns, everybody's comfortable with it, we've succeeded. And in a sense, that's really just the first step, because there's so much more underneath that, if you will.
Absolutely. We're all whole and fleshed out beings, and the invitation to use a particular pronoun is an invitation to know a bit about the person. It is that invitation, but it can never encompass the fullness of their being. And so there's that ongoing listening that I'm hearing you highlight. Others, Joan.
Yeah, I've confronted this when I taught OWL, and the kids are much more comfortable with it than we are. But to me, thinking back, and I say this as a lifelong tomboy, a girl who likes boy things, but now girls, it's such a wide possibility of what you can be as a girl or as a boy, I mean, it's basically much more accepted to just be yourself. It doesn't, and it always bothers me, the pronoun thing of putting people into boxes, particularly when there are, in middle school years, because I think it's really important for people to be accepted for who they are, but why do they have to be defined in a little box unless they choose that? I mean, if they choose to say, this is what I want to say to you all about myself, that's wonderful, but going around the room asking everybody for their box at that age when I don't know if they figured out their box yet, it just seems confusing to me. Or they might change it, yeah. But.
Thank you, Joan. I think what I heard is something that resonates with something she said early on, is that there's no one way to be non-binary in the same way there's no one way to be cisgender, right? So as a little girl might have once upon a time been forced in a particular box of what that means, that you're a girl. The different ways that girlhood looks today, it's so expansive, right? And I think that's something to be celebrated, that we can be our full selves. And if you identify as a girl, there's not one particular way that looks. And I'm hearing that, like, okay, so why are these pronouns being something why is this something that we've got to be thinking about so young? I think there's an interesting invitation there for us to be comfortable with the evolution of our identities and recognizing that a young person's identity and the way they choose to think about themselves, these are helpful tools for them at that time, but that's not static, it's dynamic, and that might evolve over time. I wonder if anyone else has any thoughts on that particular point.
I think maybe another way, just extending what you just said, is that a lot of high school kids don't necessarily know exactly how to define themselves. So many more are saying their pronouns are they, them, just to leave options open. And I find that really encouraging to see that openness is an important thing to have, especially in our political climate in general, right? So I think it's a positive thing, and then maybe they'll stick with those for their lives or they'll change. I have a question though, because I have someone I know has a child who's a teenager who is they, them pronouns, who uses those. And when I want to refer to that child, I can't say, how is she or how is he doing? And you can't say it, and you can't say how, so you would say they, right? How are they doing? But then if you want to just say, and her, like normally you'd say, well, her son did this or her daughter did this. How would you would just say her child or teen or something? Yeah, okay.
Thank you, yeah. The gendered language pops up everywhere, right? It's not just in pronouns. And so this conversation around an invitation to expand our thinking around what pronouns can be used for a person and respecting them when someone invites you to use them, it really is. It's that first step. It's that initial way of expressing respect, right? That this person has opened up a piece of themselves to you, and they're inviting you to know them a little bit better, and you build relationship by respecting that, right? And also recognize it's going to take some practice to say, okay, well, that means that when I refer to their child, I have to think about child, or I have to think about student or teen rather than, or sibling rather than brother or sister, right? So there's all these different ways that this kind of snowballs, but I'm thinking about the sermon this morning. One of the things that I didn't get in there was one of the famous Afrofuturist authors is Octavia Butler. She wrote this series, The Parable of the Sower and The Parable of the Talents. It's this futuristic sci-fi dystopian universe where the main character is a black woman, and in there she's dealing with the crisis of what the United States has turned into at that particular time. and she's developing a particular spirituality and called Earthseed. And one of the ideas of this new spirituality and her community is God is change, and it kind of removes this person God and recognizes that human beings have the ability to shape the divine, and we are shaped by the divine. And so there's something really holy in learning and changing and growing. And I think that honoring the holiness of that process, even when it's really uncomfortable and it's something that's new to us, it's how that imagination gets brought into reality, right? I wonder, other comments, things that resonated with you, and then we've already kind of started to jump in, and that's great. Things that were curious to you, things that were new, things that were maybe, I don't really get that. Open up to both of those options. Things that resonated, things that didn't really know about before and have more questions.
I would just say I work in an organization that's been pronoun forward for, I don't know, the 10 years I've been there. And it's been, it's a journey for me. At first I was like, what the, I mean, isn't it obvious? But we all can practice. And, as you were saying, Tom, it really, it's an invitation into a deeper kind of relating across all aspects of us within the organization. So it's an organization that has become much more welcoming of a whole person than many other places I've worked in. I think the pronouns are just sort of an indicator of that. I was struck by something, I can't paraphrase well, but there was something about it being an invitation into a deeper conversation. Because, I've got the pronouns. I know how to do all the things. I know who's the theys and the she's and the all of it. I've got it all down. But that isn't the end, right? That's just, so I really appreciated, and the sacredness of the listening that goes with that. That is part of being a full human, whether it's about anything. So I just appreciate that.
Others?
Well, I was just going to say, it's one thing to, this, it seems like there's we talk about vocabulary. These are new vocabulary. I mean, there's words on this page that I've not seen before. So it's one thing to know the language. It's another thing to know how to communicate with that language. And one of the things that struck me the most was this is really, at this point, in approaching somebody and asking for their pronouns is just a way of showing respect to that person, and it's a different way of inviting yourself into a conversation. So anyway, this has been somewhat enlightening for me, and I feel like I'm not an expert on this by any stretch, but having worked in the theater, this is definitely something that you run across often. But there's definitely terms on here that I'm glad, thank you for the handout, because this is very helpful. I just think that the interesting thing was that she talked about, just in terms of the ability for somebody to feel more welcome and then thrive was a really critical piece of information, I think.
Yeah, how she's creating this space as a teacher, right? I put a little bit about her. She's a co-chair of the Department of Psychology at University of Hartford, and she's received all sorts of awards for creating like a safe and welcoming environment in her classroom, and that this is part of how she creates that space. And so I'm curious, how do you think, how have you seen pronouns in this conversation already show up in the way that First Parish is trying to create a space? And I'm also curious what you think about how we can do better and where we can grow in this area.
I think it was in staff meeting, maybe, that we thought, well, the choir should maybe model putting their pronouns on their name tags. And at our little alto party at Vicky's house, we were thinking, well, actually the choir should wear their name tags during choir practice, because there's still some choir members that don't know all the names of the people on the other side of the room now that we have so many people in the choir. But what you said about a safe space, all of a sudden I got it. Like, I really got that we cannot thrive as individuals in any community, where it's where we work or our families or church, without feeling safe to express how we feel about things. And I think it's all tied into first doing what seems like just walking the walk, and then it sinks in as just a normal way to be. So,
Others, where has this shown up? Life here.
We do mainly wear our name tags. I would love to encourage all of us to put our pronouns on our name tag, because it would take the burden off of those who are walking in the door who we don't already know how they are identifying, and it would signal that we understand that that there's lots of different expressions. So, and the fact that we presume like we're all set. We're welcoming because we have our names, and that's a step. Do y'all have your tags on? Mary. Anyway.
Thank you for that, Sarah. There are places where, as a staff, we've started to try and go in this direction. I don't know if anyone has noticed on the back of our bulletin every Sunday at the bottom, there's who are the staff of First Parish. And as of this year, we have our pronouns as staff, kind of trying to model that. You might also have noticed it in like the signatures of our emails, or on the website, staff page of the website, just to try and do exactly that, kind of create this visibility, so folks, if they are trans or non-binary, gender queer, might come and look at our materials and they might say, oh wow, okay, so the staff, the pastors, the ministers are recognizing that this is an important thing for many people, and so this might be a place where I would be safe to share who I am and invite people to use my pronouns. And on the note of our wider name tags, there's an ongoing conversation. I don't know if you are aware that we've got the Open and Welcoming Task Force that has been tasked by the parish committee after last year's resolution, where we expanded our open and welcoming statement to be intentionally inclusive of trans and non-binary folks. The task force was tasked with the responsibility of looking at the ways that we're living into that in all the different places of life here at First Parish. And so one of the pieces that we're looking at is having a conversation that has already started with welcoming and the deacons around pronouns, and including them in some way on our name tags. And it sounds to me, based off of what I've heard of those meetings, that we're looking into stickers that could be put out in the narthex in the coming weeks. So keep an eye out for that. We are looking for what would be best, and we're working in collaboration with the folks that are tasked with those responsibilities of thinking about the life of the church in terms of welcoming, name tags, spiritual life on Sunday mornings. But that we are moving in that direction. And we invite you just to recognize that it's not a requirement to add them to name tags. I think that's one of the learnings from this video, is that it's an invitation and it's not something that should ever be an expectation. So, for example, I've been in many classrooms where when we go around, the professor will say names, and if you would like, share your pronouns. And something else about yourself, XYZ, as a icebreaker to get to know one another. It's not something that everyone would be required to do, but it is something that as we grow in this more and more, the more people do it, the more culturally aware I think folks will be that this is important, and I think the more likely that folks that walk into our doors will feel that welcome when they want to share their identity with us. Not just folks that are coming in for the first time, but also our kids that are coming down the hill. And just to recognize that more and more people are being comfortable with naming who they are, and with young people it is especially the case. If you note on that handout I gave you, the statistics that she quoted here, percentage of Americans that know someone who is transgender went up from 37 to 42%. From 2017 to 2021, someone who knows someone who goes by gender-neutral pronouns went up from 18 to 26%. This is something that will be more and more important moving forward, and especially as it pertains to making sure that our kids know that the same welcoming environment that they experienced up the hill growing up here at First Parish, they can experience here when they come into the big church, as we called it when I was growing up.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you're saying, Sarah. I also feel really strongly that like this is how culture evolves. And so people are invited to add their pronouns or not, but also this is like consciousness raising. This is learning about our privilege. This is all the things, right? So it's like at a certain point it's not going to be a choice. And it's important that our kids see that like we are actively affirming and choosing also.
Absolutely. We put out some pronoun pins, the ones that I have here, on Pride Sunday last year. And I know that the ushers were handing them out, and there was some feedback of like, I'm old school. I don't really need that. Understandable if this is a new piece of information for you. This is something that you're not familiar with. That's nothing wrong with that. But I think the more and more we talk about it, that this isn't about, whether or not you feel that it's important that folks use a particular pronoun for you. It's about making sure that for someone else who it is important for, they feel safe to tell you, right? Go ahead.
I just had a couple questions about the language. Like on here, there's a sticker that says they, she, and there was a reference to that in the video. So,
Yes.
So in what context would that person use they, and when would they use she?
It is
how does that
unique
work?
to the individual. And so folks that use multi-pronouns feel that their gender identity is fluid and generally speaking, and so at different times in different ways that might show up differently for them. And when you're not sure, you say, like the example she gave is if you see it in a email signature, or if you see it on somebody's name tag, you say, I noticed that you use both they and she. Do you have a preference as to how I interchange those? Is there a particular way and time that you'd like me to use one versus the other? And just ask, And for example, just last week I was at Harvard for a training for my ordination process, and we went around and we were invited to share pronouns, and there was a person there who used both they and she, and they said, anytime, any way you want to use it, either feels good and feels right for me, and so they kind of gave us that indication when they shared that they use both, right?
I had one other question, and I came in late, so I apologize, and it may have been discussed in the beginning of the video, but what's the difference between transgender and non-binary?
So these are umbrella terms, and so there's some overlap. Some folks might say they feel like they fit under both, but generally speaking, transgender is an umbrella term for folks that identify as a gender other than what they were assigned at birth, that it's a girl or it's a boy moment that's based off of the way that you physically present, which again, is itself actually a spectrum, right? Because there's a lot of diversity in the way our bodies present and our genetics present. So there's that whole thing. But when the doctor says it's a blank, right? Person who is cisgender resonates with that and feels good in that box that they've been assigned, right? Someone who's transgender does not feel good in that box, and so they identify in some other way. That person could be assigned female at birth, but say, I'm actually a man, they're a trans man, right? Someone that is non-binary means that the boxes themselves are an issue, right? And so they might say, I don't identify with either of these boxes that my society has developed as gender structures. And so it might be fluid. They might say at different times in different ways, I show up in this way or that way. They might say, I am agender or don't ascribe to gender whatsoever. So there's a variety of ways that being non-binary can look and feel to a person. And so when someone says, I identify as a demigirl, it's totally cool to be like, you know, I would love to know what that means for you if you feel comfortable to share. You know, if this is a new term for you, that's okay, right? It's learning a new vocabulary and just making sure the person knows that you are open to learning and you're so glad that they shared this piece of who they are with you, that you've been invited in to learn about them, and just allowing them space to, in the way that they feel comfortable and safe in that moment. If you would like to share, to say more, I'd love to hear, you know, what that means for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's girl but not girl. It's demigirl and demiboy are like on that non-binary spectrum where they identify sometimes and in some ways with what society has structured around girlhood or femininity, but not completely. So it's some might have at one point in time called them a tomboy, but for whatever reason, different folks might say, that's not a term that resonates for me. This is the term that resonates for me, and how I show up in my my understanding of what it means to be a girl is demigirl.
I thought it was interesting that,
For folks online.
oh, sorry, that none of these terms, it doesn't have anything to do with sexual preference.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's one of the things we talked about last spring when we talked about gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation. You can be of any sexual orientation and be trans or be non-binary. And so, like, I know people who are straight trans men, because they're a trans man, who is attracted to and romantically drawn to women, right? And so they identify as straight, but they're still queer in their gender presentation and identity.
Just related to that, Eddie Izzard. I don't know how many of you know who Eddie Izzard is. Oh my gosh, oh boy, he's one of the most hilarious comedians. He's a British comedian, and he came out as trans in the 80s, and he's been bullied, and he's also run over 35 marathons, and he has a wonderful TED Talk, which I recommend to all of you if it's entertaining, but he spoke at a LGBTQ gathering, and I can share the link with you if you want. And he talks about, he's attracted to women, but he dresses sometimes. He's fluid, but he dresses a lot in women's high heels, sometimes in a dress, and he has just recently come out with another name, Susan. He's a phenomenal actor who's in a lot of movies, and he's just one of the funniest stand-up comedians. So, but I learned a lot from that TED Talk where he explained how he views sexual orientation versus his gender identity. So,
Thank you. Yeah, that visibility is so important. As we wrap up, wonder if there's any other.
I was just, one of the things that struck me having some familiarity with the Trevor Project, and I think it is easy, it's like I'm old-fashioned, I don't need a pronoun thing, is to look at the statistics for LGBTQ youth that attempt suicide, and it's like, so 27% where nobody respects their pronouns versus 10% where everyone around them does. And to me, that's one of those, it's like, I don't understand it. I may not understand it at all. I don't care. It's like if I could cut teen suicide attempts by that amount by wearing red shoes and an orange hat, I would do it. I wouldn't understand why, but you also have to believe the data of the Trevor Project, and it's a well-respected group, so I do trust their data. So.
Thank you.
it's easy for us to do.
Absolutely. The story of the pink shirt. Would you?
I gave a talk on empathy to my old boarding school several years ago, and I started the talk with the story of a guy on the football team who showed up at high school, and he was outed by one of his buddies, and he was teased and bullied online. And then word went out from some other of his friends. He liked the color pink. So the word went around to everyone in the school to show up the next day wearing pink shirts. And it made him feel seen. And so it is that simple, the pronouns that we can wear, if it can make people feel good.
I just wanted to pile on not just the wearing of the pronouns, it's going to be too advanced for the first step, but hi, it's Sarah Andresiak, she, her for the deacons.
Love it. Love it. Thank you.
Just following up on what, is it Tom? What Tom said, I do think it's a life and death issue. I had a close family member, my father, who was gay but never came out and commit suicide. So it's serious stuff. I think it's really important for people to be able to express who they are and have that accepted.
Thank you, Adam.
Yeah, I want to say that too, that like for Lola, for my godchild, it took her a few months to actually tell us that they were going by they, them, and it felt like she was coming out to us, and so I think that it's a really pivotal moment, and you really want to be there, like, fully for it.
And I'd like to add a really wonderful thing that happened. My second child, born Tristan, and sang with us in the choir here, and moved to North Carolina, and then became trans, now Nicole. But when she announced that to the family, to let people know what was going on, immediately Susan and my kids, Chris and Annie, were on a plane down there right away, staying for a week. And it was just so great to see that love and affirmation flow in the family. I mean, what we can do here is really special.
Yes and amen. I'm looking at that. Yes. I'm looking at that last paragraph on the back of the handout that was from the text she put up about gender euphoria. These are all the places in that Trevor Project survey of LGBTQ youth mental health, the ways that they find joy and strength. And I bolded some things of, spheres for us, faith and spirituality. There are LGBTQ youth in our congregation, and this can be a place where they feel gender euphoria if we were to so choose to be that community for them. Making sure they feel seen. Well, how can they be, how can they feel seen? Well, modeling it, right? Putting on those pronouns, listening and respecting when they share them, right? Practicing when this is I've never known someone using they, them, I need to practice. I remember the first time I had a friend who used they, them. I would literally talk out loud in my room by myself as if I were talking about them, practicing, and like you do, for, anything when you're trying to learn a new thing, right? So, seeing rainbow flags and stickers in public, that stripe on the bulletin, on the bulletin, on the sign, there are ways that we can visibly say, let's make this space a space where you, as you are, as you show up in this world and understand yourself to be, you are so, so welcome here. And let it not just be words, but let it be action, right? Thank you all for being here. More to come.
Who's on the task force?
We've got Peter Pease. We've got Tom. We've got Dave. We've got Jeannie. And we've got Jacqueline LaFerriere.
Awesome.
So it's a great group.